Three boys are in a churchyard bragging about their fathers. And the first boy says, my dad scribbles a few words on a piece of paper and he calls it a poem, and they give him $50. Second boy says, that's nothing. My dad scribbles a few words on a piece of paper and he calls it a song, and they give him $100. The third boy says, I got you beat. My dad scribbles a few words on a piece of paper, he calls it a sermon, and it takes 8 people to carry all the money. They tell me that a preacher's kid can be difficult for a young child. I read once about a preacher's little boy who was told by his mom that he should wash his hands because there were germs living in all the dirt that he'd been playing with. And he looked up at his mom and got this really serious look on his face and disgusted. He said, germs, germs. Germs and Jesus, germs and Jesus. That's all I ever hear around this place. I've never seen either one. Well, at a young age, that little boy wasn't sure he was comfortable believing in something that he hadn't seen, and there are a lot of people like that. Remember how Thomas reacted to the news that Jesus had risen from the dead? In John 20:25 tells us, he said to the other disciples, unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it. Thomas had difficulty believing in something that he had not seen or touched. But now, here in his first letter, we find the Apostle John saying, yes, I have seen, I have heard, and I have touched Jesus. And that's what I've been preaching about. And John is saying that he believes so strongly in this Jesus that he'd seen and touched and heard, that he wrote as he was proclaiming to you what we have seen and heard, so that you may also have fellowship with us. Now, you'd think it'd be easier for us if we, like the Apostle John here, could claim to have seen and touched and heard Jesus. You'd think that it'd be easier for us to convince people about Jesus if we ourselves had actually seen and touched and heard Jesus. But the Gospels repeatedly point out that even when people personally saw the miraculous power of Jesus, they still rejected it. Even when they heard from the lips of those who had personally seen Jesus, they still wouldn't believe it. Being an eyewitness to Jesus did not make it easier to convince people to become Christians. Lee Strobel, in his book I just finished called Inside the Mind of Unchurched Harry and Mary, he maintained that the unchurched aren't necessarily looking for miracles and appearance of Christ. He says that the unchurched haven't necessarily rejected God, they've rejected church. And many of them are morally adrift, but they secretly want that anchor. And they often don't understand Christianity, but they're also ignorant about what they claim to believe in. And often they're not so much concerned with the question, is Christianity true? Instead, they're more concerned with the question, does Christianity work? And how can I experience it? In other words, just like the people in John's day, the unchurched of today want to hear about what you've seen, what you've touched, and what you've heard. They want to know if it works for you. A woman put an ad in the local newspaper and she said, lost 50 pounds selling all my old clothes. They're in good condition. Well, she was bombarded with phone calls. Nobody wanted to buy the clothes. What do you think they wanted? Yeah, they wanted to know how she lost the 50 pounds. You see, the callers wanted to know about something that had changed her life, hoping that this was something that could change their lives too. And that's really what the unchurched are looking for. They want to know if Jesus works in your life. Now, there are 2 ways that I can think of that can help your friends decide if Jesus works in your life. First, they want to hear your story. Why did you become a Christian? Why do you think Jesus has made a difference in your life? Or why are you a Christian? Now I'm going to do something really scary for a preacher. I'm going to quit talking for a few minutes. And the reason it's so scary is that the moment the preacher stops talking, people's minds have a tendency to drift into never land. But I want you to take just a couple moments here and answer at least one of these questions. Now, you can write it on the answer on your bulletin on the sermon notes page if you want to. You can write it in the corner of your mind. It doesn't matter. But for the next moment or so, I want you to ponder these questions. Why did you become a Christian? Why do you think Jesus has made a difference in your life? Why are you a Christian? The radio people, listeners, just hang with us. It's going to be just a moment of silence, and that's fine. Take a moment to consider this question. The reason I ask you to do this is because some believers have never given much thought to those questions. They've never given much thought as to why they're Christians or even why they first became Christians. They simply kind of go through the motions of going to church, going to Sunday school, going to Bible studies and youth activities, but they oftentimes they don't consider why they do them. And so they've had a hard time explaining to others why they should love Jesus like they do. So first, to help people understand how Jesus has worked in your life, you need to hear your story. Then the second way that you can convince them that Jesus works is if they can see Jesus in your life. On the way home from church, a little girl was asking, they said, "Mommy, I've been thinking." And mother said, "Oh, really, what about?" "Well, my teacher said this morning that God is bigger than we are. Is that true?" Obviously, she went to a Christian school. "Yes, that's true," Mom replied. "He also said that God lives in us. Is that true?" Mom said, "Yes." "Well," said the little girl, "if God is bigger than us and He lives in us, wouldn't He show through?" Out of the mouths of babes. You and I need to ask ourselves, does Jesus show through in our lives? But how will we know that Jesus is showing through? Look at Galatians 5, verses 22 and 23. I'd like you to read this with me. "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." If you show these qualities in your life, people will see Jesus in you. Okay, so how does that work? Well, I picked one of the fruits on the list as an illustration. And Galatians tells us that one of the fruits of the Spirit is having joy. And we talked about the importance of that last week. So, do people see your life filled with joy? When people are around you, do they see you at peace? Content with your life? Or do they see you as one who complains about things instead? Now we all complain now and again. In fact, let's take a poll. How many of you have complained at least once this past week? Every day. Okay, so we all complain when life gets uncomfortable or somebody rubs us the wrong way. But some people seem to have developed the trait of complaining down to a fine art. If you ask them, they might even explain to you that it's their spiritual gift. I once knew a man who reminded me of a rose. He did beautiful things in the church. He worked with the youth. He'd been actively involved in outreach for the church. He worked on missions. He was extremely talented. And he was just like a rose, so much beauty about him. But roses have thorns, and so did he. Whenever you're around him, all he did was complain. He complained about the preacher. He complained about the church leadership, the music, the way church did this or that, or didn't do that. He never seemed to be happy. He had absolutely no joy in his life. And he was just like that rose. There was so much beauty about him, but being around him was like holding on to the stem of that rose loaded with thorns. He had no joy in it, but he made those around him really uncomfortable. Y'all know somebody like that? Or see lots of nodding heads. You know, they complain about how things are going at work or at home or at church. They might say, well, you don't understand my situation. You don't understand the type of people that I have to deal with. Well, no, we don't. You nor I really know what other people have to go through in their life and what effect it has on their outcome in their life. But I do know that joy isn't so much a byproduct of life as it is a choice we make. A young college student was selling magazines from door to door, and he was lame from a boyhood accident, and it made it really difficult to walk. And at one house he stopped, and the lady quickly turned him down, and as he turned to walk away, she noticed that he had this limp and a handicap. And she said, oh no, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that you were crippled. I'll buy a magazine. And he responded by saying, I'm not selling sympathy. I'm selling subscriptions. And she says, well, doesn't that color your life? And he says, yeah, but I get to choose the color. And that's the way it is with us who belong to Jesus Christ. We get to choose the colors in our lives. And because we belong to Jesus, we have the opportunity to choose the brightest and most cheerful colors because we have a reason to do so. Now, there are some people that just come naturally by these traits of love, and joy, and patience. But for the most part, for a lot of us, it can be a struggle at times. And the reason we can show these fruits of the Spirit in our lives, even when we're faced with difficult situations and people around us, is because Jesus shines in our lives and brightens up even the darkest corners. Thank you, Holly, for that children's message. It was wonderful. Wonderful, right on point. Jesus wrote in the scripture that Gary read, if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his Son, purifies us from all sin. You see, Jesus has the power to just light up our lives so that the vibrant, true colors of our lives show through. And when people see that in us, they see Jesus. And that's what I like about this church. All the beautiful colors of the Spirit just shine out from this congregation. And so many of you have the qualities on that list from Galatians that it's truly a joy to work amongst you. Now, I want to close with this thought. John wrote that we proclaim to you what we have seen and heard, so that you also may have fellowship with us. And our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. My point is this. When we talk to people about our faith, it's far easier just to invite them to church than it is to share our faith and introduce them to Jesus. Now, that isn't a condemnation. That's just a fact of life. And it's because it's easier for us to do that, we often forget that our main goal should be to bring these friends of ours, these kin, to fellowship with the Father and his Son, Jesus Christ. If we're not careful, we get in the mindset that the goal is to bring people in the building to pay the bills so that we can fill the pews. Having people come in the door is a great thing. Having them join us in fellowship is a wonderful thing. But let us never be deceived into thinking that church can be a substitute for a relationship with God. And so you should not only invite people to church, but you should also find ways to invite them to Jesus by your story. and by your life. Jesus should show through in what you say and in what you do, so that others will know who it is that you have a fellowship with. A Hindu trader in India once asked a missionary, "What do you put on your face that makes it shine?" And with a surprise, the man of God answered, "I don't put anything on it." And the questioner began to lose patience and said, "Yes, you do. All of you people who believe in Jesus seem to have it. I've seen it in the towns of Agra and Surat and the city of Bombay." And suddenly, the Christian understood. And his face glowed even more as he said, "Now I know what you mean. And I'll tell you the secret. It's not something we put on from the outside. It's something that we put on the inside. It's the reflection of the light of God in our hearts." And the missionary succeeded in leading that trader out of Hinduism into Christ because Jesus showed through. When you look at yourself, what's showing through you? So you're going to our invitation hymn, "I Then Shall Live." I'd like you to think about that. And think about those answers that you filled out or that you thought about during our moment. Think about why you're a Christian. And if you're not, if you feel Jesus shining in you, and you want to become a member of this congregation, give your life to Christ, I encourage you to come forward so we can pray together about that. Let's stand as we sing, "I Then Shall Live."